I rode the train between Washington and Wilmington and back and forth every single day. Not a joke. I commuted every single day for 36 years. Angelo Negri, a conductor, senior conductor, walked up and said, "Joey, baby!" I thought the Secret Service was going to shoot him. And I said, no, he's a friend. So you know how many miles you travel on Amtrak, Joey? You've traveled over 2 million miles, Joey. Fact is, I'd probably take Angie's word. I think I hold a record. Other than a conductor. Well, we're going to win and we're going to help. We have plans to build a railroad from the Pacific all the way across the Indian Ocean. We have plans to build in Angola, one of the largest solar plants in the world. I can go on, but I'm not. I'm going off script. I'm going to get in trouble. And I know about Amtrak. I've traveled 1.2 million miles on Amtrak because I commuted every single solitary day, 270 miles a day. As my colleagues can tell you, when the Senate was in session. You get a kick out of this, Sherrod. The Secret Service doesn't like me taking the train because it stops too many places. And so I was riding home, though, to see my mom, who was living with me because she was in hospice, and on a Friday. And a guy named Angelo Negri, a conductor, senior conductor, walked up and said, "Joey, baby!" Grabbed my cheek. I thought he was going to shoot him. You know, they go, "Joey!" I said, "Ange." I said, "He's okay. He's a friend." It's a true story. He said, "What's all this I read in the paper? You traveled over 1 million miles on Air Force planes. Every single mile a vice president or president travels, they keep a public record of on an aircraft, an American aircraft." And he said, "The boys and I were at the retirement dinner up in Jersey. So we figured it out. Average 222 days a year, 36 years, total of 269 miles every day. Joey," whether it's true or not, I said, 1,200,000 miles, not counting as vice president. I got to know all the conductors so well that I became friends. And one day, as vice president, I was going home on the train, which the Secret Service doesn't like because there's so many opportunities to interrupt the train. And this particular, I'm not going to embarrass him and say his name, he grabbed me and she goes, "Joey, baby!" And I thought they're going to shoot him. Anyway, I said, no, he's right. He said, "I just read in the paper, you traveled 1,100,000 miles on Air Force planes," because you got to list how many miles you travel on. And he said, "Big deal." He said, "Joey, we had a retirement dinner." He said, "You know what? You figured out. You know how many miles you travel on Amtrak?" I said, "No." He said, 1,200,000 miles, 119 days a year, 300 miles round trip, 36 years plus 5. I'm going, oh God. My point was I was on the train a lot. I've traveled over, God's truth, I've traveled over 1,250,000 miles on Amtrak. Everybody thought that, anyway, because I went home every single night after my wife and daughter were killed because I couldn't afford a home in Delaware and in Washington. So I commuted every day. I remember one day, as vice president, the government keeps fastidious records of how many miles you travel on government planes. And so there's a big headline. Biden travels, I forget it was, 1 million miles on Air Force Two and so on and so forth. And I'm getting on the train to go home with the Secret Service. They're great. They're with me here today, all 800 of you. But all kidding aside, they're wonderful. And I was getting on the train because they didn't like me getting on the train, Congressman, because it's more dangerous circumstance. You can stop people, things on tracks, etc. But I would go going home to see my mom, who was sick. And one of the conductors I know for years walked up and grabbed, said, "Joey, baby!" Grabbed my cheek. And not a joke. And I thought that he was going to get shot. True story. And I said, no, it's okay. We've known each other. He said, "Joey, big deal. 1 million miles," or wherever it was, 1 million miles on Air Force Two. Come on, Joey. You know how many miles you travel on Amtrak? I said, "No, Ange, I don't know how many miles." He said, we calculated it at the retirement dinner. He said, 36 years, 119 days a year, back and forth. Then as vice president, he said, "We figure you've done X number of trips. It adds up to 1,200,000 miles on Amtrak." And I said, If my dad were here, he'd call it a misspent adulthood. When I became vice president, one of the Capitol Hill newspapers estimated that I had taken more than 7,000 round trips in Amtrak over my career. I think that's an exaggeration. And I'm going to rely on those two conductors that Mr. Weaver will remember. One of them was a guy named Angelo Negri. And Angelo, there was an article, I guess my fourth or fifth year as vice president, saying Biden travels 1,300,000 miles on Air Force One. And I used to, the Secret Service didn't like it, but I used to like to take the train home. My mom was sick, and I'd try to come home almost every weekend as vice president to see her. And I was getting on the train, and Angelo Negri came up to me and goes, "Joey, baby!" And he grabbed my cheek, started to squeeze it like he always did. And I thought he was going to get shot. I'm serious. And I said, no, he's a friend. He said, "Joey, what's the big deal? 1,200,000, 300,000 miles on Air Force Two. You know how many miles you travel on Amtrak?" I said, "No, Ange, I don't know." And he gave me the calculation. And he said, "You travel 1,515,000 miles on Amtrak." So the fact is, I probably take Ange's word before I took the word of what the article said. But the point is, in the process, as Conductor Weaver will tell you, Amtrak became my family. I literally every single day that I was in the United States Senate got either the 728, it became the 732, and got home on, if I got lucky, I got the Metro that left, the last one left at 6, or I got the 730 coming home. And you get to know everybody. My wife called me one day and says, "Did you read the paper today?" And I was up campaigning for a guy named Pat Leahy in Vermont. I said, "No, honey, I didn't see the Wilmington paper." He said, "Headline, above the fold." Only a politician's wife would say that. "Biden, poorest man in Congress. Is that true?" Like I was cheating on her or something. But I was. And I couldn't afford a house in Washington, and I couldn't afford a house in Delaware. If I sold my house in Delaware, I'd lose the election. So I started a commute. It's only 300 miles a day, but it still takes me an average of 4 hours beginning to end. And so what happened was when you travel as vice president on Air Force planes, they keep a precise number of miles you travel. And I guess it was in my 7th year or 6th year as vice president, there was a headline in a New York paper saying, "Biden travels almost 1,200,000 miles on Air Force planes, 1,100,000 or whatever." I'm getting on the train one day. The Secret Service are the best in the world. They don't like me traveling the train because there are too many opportunities for people to do bad things on trains. And so I'm getting on a train to go home and see my mom, who was sick and in hospice at my home. And this guy, I won't mention his name because I will get him in trouble, but one of the senior guys in Amtrak who I rode with all the time comes up and goes, "Joey, baby," grabs my cheek. Swear to God, I thought they were going to shoot him. And I said, no. I said, "What's the matter, Angie?" He said, I read this thing about over 1 million miles on Air Force planes. He said, "Hell, you know how many miles you travel on Amtrak?" I said, "No, Angie, I don't know." He said, "We just had a retirement dinner up in Newark." He said, "You traveled average 117 days a year, round trip, 300 miles a day. 36 years, that's 1,285,000 miles. I don't want to hear any more about the Air Force." True story. I swear to God. I'm getting off point here, but anyway. So I started commuting every day, back and forth. And that's how I got involved as sort of Mr. Amtrak. Because when they publish that, they keep fastidious records on how many miles you travel on government aircraft when you're vice president. And I had traveled a little over, I think it was 1,400,000 miles. It was on the front page of the paper. But I used to like to take the train home on Friday still as vice president because it cost a lot of money to take that small plane back. But in addition to that, but the Secret Service felt much more secure if I wasn't on a train. But they humored me and let me go home on Fridays sometimes. My mom was living at my home. She was passing. And I remember getting on the train and a guy named Angelo Negria. I got to know their families, all the conductors and all the people, all those years. And he came up to me and he grabbed me and said, "Joey," grabbed my cheek. I thought the Secret Service was going to shoot him. I said, "No." I said, "He's okay." It's a true story. And he said, "I just read, Joey, 1,003,000 or 400,000 miles on Air Force Two. Big deal." You know, the boys and I, we were checking. We went on a retirement dinner. Went up to New Jersey for the dinner. "You know how many miles you travel on Amtrak?" I said, "No, Ange, I don't." He said, "Joey," he said, "we figure 117 days a year, 36 years, and the next number of days as vice president. You've traveled 2,100,000 miles on Amtrak. I think I hold a record, other than a conductor." And so they gave me a key to the engine because I'm the only one I know of. I'm not supposed to say that, but I got it hidden. Now I know I'm Mr. Amtrak. I've traveled over 2 million miles in Amtrak. I commuted every day. I get it. I know you think I'm nuts. But after my wife and daughter were killed, I decided to commute back and forth to Delaware. It was a 257-mile round trip. I'll tell you a real quick story. I shouldn't bore you with it, but you know, the Secret Service, they're the best in the world, doesn't like you taking Amtrak. It stops too many times on the train. They want me flying home, and small jets are available as vice president. But that costs a lot of money, so I would go home on Fridays because my mom was passing away. I'd go home on Amtrak. And they keep fastidious record of the miles you travel in an Air Force aircraft as president and vice president. And toward the end of my term, headline came out in all the papers, Biden travels, I think it was 1.3 or 1.7 million miles on the Air Force planes. And so I'm getting on the train on that Friday, and these guys all became my family, all the conductors. And a guy named Angelo Negri came up and he goes, "Joey, baby," grabs my cheek like that. And I thought they were going to shoot him. I really did. I said, no. He's a friend. He's like, "What the hell?" And he said, "Big deal, Joey. 1 million, whatever it was, 300,000 miles. You know how many miles you travel on Amtrak, Joey?" And I said, "No, Ange, I know." And he said, "At retirement dinner, we calculated it. We estimated 127 days a year, 250 miles back and forth, 36 years. Then as vice president, Joey, you travel more on Amtrak." Well, and when they named a station after me in my city, someone complained that Biden was using his influence. I said, hell, they should name the whole Northeast Corridor after me. When I was vice president, I flew over 1 million miles on Air Force Two, and I was going home as the United States as vice president. And one of the conductors said to me, "Hey Joe, big deal, 1 million, whatever, 200." You said you've traveled over 1 million miles on Amtrak. I said, "How the hell do you know that?" And they added it up at their. I just want you to know that Amtrak is here. They can tell you that you should name half the line after me. I am the most railroad guy you're ever going to meet. 2,100,000 miles on Amtrak. Hear me now? Not a joke. What happened was, when you are a president or vice president, they keep meticulous mileage of when you fly an Air Force aircraft. And so about, I guess it was 7 years in to my tenure as vice president. And I used to always like to take Amtrak home on Friday. I tried to go home and see my mom, who was living with us at the time after my dad passed, and I'd try to get home. And the Secret Service are wonderful. They're the best in the world. They never liked me taking Amtrak because it stops too often and too many people can get on and you don't know. And but it turned out I was about number 3 in seniority on the road at the time. In terms of actual time on the road, and a lot of the folks in Amtrak became my family. Not a joke. I'd ride every day. I commuted, every single day for 36 years as Vice President of the United States. After my wife and daughter were killed, I went home to see my family, never stopped doing that. And so Angelo Negri was from, you remember Ange? Ange came up to me one day when they just had announced that I had flown 1 million some X number of miles on Air Force aircraft. And Ange comes up, and I'm getting in the car, and he goes, "Joey, baby, what are you?" And I thought the Secret Service was going to shoot him. I said, no, he's good, he's good. It's a true story. And he said, "I just read, big deal, whatever it was, 1,200,000 miles, Air Force. You know how many miles you did Amtrak?" And I said, "No, Ange, I don't have any idea, pal." He said, "Let me tell you, we were at the retirement dinner." And he said, "We added it up. You averaged 100, I think it says 21 days a year. 121 days a year, 36 years, plus as Vice President, boom, boom. You have traveled over 2 million miles, Joe. I don't hear any more about the Air Force." But in the Build Back Better plan, I got more money for passenger rail than the entire Amtrak system cost to begin with. We're going to change the nation in a big way. I got to tell you a quick story that has nothing to do with anything. When I was vice president, the Secret Service didn't like me traveling on Amtrak because there were too many options for people to cause trouble along the way. But I insisted I do it. And one day they put in the newspaper, Biden travels 1 million, I think, don't hold me the exact number, I think it was 350,000 miles on Air Force Two. And so I'm walking up to getting the train on that Friday, and a guy who was the number 3 guy from New Jersey on seniority as a conductor walked up and grabbed me, and he goes like this, "Joey, baby," grabbed my cheek. I thought the Secret Service was going to shoot him. And I said, no, he's a friend. He said, "Joey, big deal. 1,300,000 miles on Amtrak, on Air Force Two. You know how many miles you traveled on Amtrak?" I said, "No." He said, "With the retirement dinner, we worked it out." He said, 36 years in the Senate, X number of years at that point as vice president, average 131 days a year, 257 miles a day. Joey, you traveled over 2 million miles. Big deal. I thought they should name the railroad after me or something. But at any rate.